Gill is a cancer-fighting biochemist from Boston, and she is the host of the Sober Powered podcast. Through her podcast, she helps people understand the science behind alcohol use and empowers them with the information they need to increase their own sober power. Welcome to the podcast, Gill.
Thank you. What an intro. I love that.
I watch a lot of game shows, so I practice.
It's good for podcasting, though. It's a good skill.
Yeah. Well, I found you through an episode of the Ask Pat podcast, actually. You were on his podcast looking for help growing your own podcast back then. So tell us about how your podcast has grown since you started it and the impact that you've already seen since you've been doing it.
Yeah, so I started from zero, from no one knowing me at all, or having any interest in what I had to say. And I started with, 0 followers, the whole thing. And I just decided to podcast. So I just put it out there the same day. I never had a launch strategy or I didn't even know how to record. And over time, I slowly was learning more. And because my podcast was so unique, it was drawing in maybe a couple listeners a week. But I've been doing it for almost 2 years. And once it starts growing, it grows exponentially, which I'm sure you've seen with your own show.
That's so cool.
And now I've helped a lot of people embrace sobriety and, not accept labels that make them uncomfortable or understand why, their moderation journey isn't going to be successful when they've been in it, year 11 and things like that. So it makes me happy to know.
Yeah. So you started off with 0 listeners, and in 2 years, how have you seen your audience grow?
Yeah, so now I'm usually in the top 100 on the mental health charts for several different countries, which is really cool. I like to see when there's a big burst in one country and it's hey, Canadian listeners, or hey, people in France, shout out to you guys. But yeah, it was cool in the beginning to watch people from all over the world listen to the show, or people would reach out to me from South America or from Asia. And it's wow, you're listening to me all the way over there. It's so cool.
I mean, that shows you how important and how widespread alcoholism is and how curious people are about sobriety. So it's really awesome that you have this outlet. It's been really helpful both for me to learn and to, pull things from your content to teach clients also. So I appreciate the work that you do. You're really open about your own journey to sobriety. How long did you personally think about getting sober, and what made you finally make the choice to just eliminate alcohol altogether?
So I started questioning my drinking 2 years after I had started drinking. I noticed that I was drinking a lot of alcohol every time I drank, which was every day. So I started to notice wow, this is a lot that you're drinking. You're getting drunk all the time here. And I thought the best solution would be to just drink less. It made a lot of sense. The only problem was I couldn't manage to do that. I just couldn't figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I tried for 5 years though. So I drank for 2, and then I started getting curious about my drinking for the next 5 years. I didn't seriously start questioning it until 2 years after that. So 3 years before I would eventually give it up. And I even went to a therapist, and I was how do you know if you're an alcoholic or not? I thought that there was some criteria that, I would check off some boxes and be oh, no, you're not, you're good. And we did eventually determine I wasn't an alcoholic. So I was okay, cool. just go back to business. And then it just kept progressing. It always progresses. And the same thing is true for any issue that you have. If you have anxiety or depression and you're just kind of letting it do its thing, it's always going to progress and get worse until you are forced to address it. And I was forced to address my drinking after I became really suicidal from it. And then the fear of that and the way that I was feeling about myself every day finally made me really like look at other options. And that's when I accepted like, yeah, moderation just, it's impossible for you. It's, it was my biggest dream was to moderate. And I have an example in my own house, my husband who can moderate. And I saw how different his experience was from mine. And that helped me like let go of those dreams too. And that was about 2.5 years ago.
What were some of the techniques that you used to moderate that did not work?
I have some good ones. I have a lot. I don't know how much time you want to spend on this, but I have
Give me
a
your
lot.
top one. The top one that was the biggest failure.
Let me see. So I think everybody tries to track their drinks, but I've tried different variations on that. So I've had a notebook, or I've had an app, or I've had a physical reminder. So at one point I was having rubber bands around my wrist because I used to research how to moderate every day of my life, thinking the answer was out there. And I had rubber bands on my wrist because I read about this guy who went to a barbecue and he had like coins in his pocket. And every time he got a drink, he'd move the coin from one side to the other. And, he only gave himself a certain amount of drinks. But because girl pants usually don't have pockets, I thought rubber bands was my solution. And I would wear these stupid rubber bands on my wrist, and I would move one to the other wrist, like every time I got a drink. And then by the time you're moving that last rubber band, it's like crisis mode. And like this is the last one. And then after that last drink, like the bargaining would start and why like, oh, I didn't mean it today. And like, so I tried different variations of counting, and
I can imagine
worked.
like, you're getting down to your last couple rubber bands and you start making those last 2 pours of wine, 1.5 servings, maybe 2 servings, that kind of stuff.
Yep. Or when my husband
No, go ahead.
Or when my husband would go to the bathroom, I'd like take a big sip out of his glass really quick. Didn't count.
Yeah. I think it's really common though. I think there's probably a handful of people listening to this that are like, I've done or do the same thing. Well, I think a lot of people do wonder if they have a problem with drinking, and maybe they just aren't aware, or maybe they're in denial. And of course, like the CDC has guidelines for what moderate and heavy drinking are, but really even beyond the physical side of it, there's the psychological element. If somebody is wondering if they have a problem with drinking, what are some of the kind of the common narratives that are going through their mind that might be red flags that they do have a problem?
I think asking the question is a sign that you shouldn't drink. I think that's the only sign you need. If you're wondering about it, there's a reason. One of my friends said to me recently, she's like, you don't walk around wondering if you're a frog, right? You just know you're not. I think if you're wondering, there's a really good reason that you're wondering. Like my husband has never questioned his drinking ever. Some people never will. Like some people have a problem and they just will never even get to that point where they question it. But if you are questioning it, there's a good reason. I think after questioning it, people will often look at the criteria and they'll be like, okay, well, at least I don't drink every day, until they do. And then there's another one. Or they'll go, at least I don't drink in the morning. I don't need a drink to get me started in the day. Or at least I don't, drink at work, or I haven't lost my job. Like we'll rattle off all of these at least. But like I said before, it's progressive. Like you can get there. We all have the capability of getting to that point. It's just some people have enough sooner than others.
It's so much like the way that poor nutrition can kind of sneak up on us. We joke on this podcast, or we have a saying that like, it would be better if the 6th piece of pizza just killed you, but it doesn't work like that. It's a slow burn. You brought up a frog. Like people say, like if you want to kill a frog to cook and you want to cook and eat a frog, you put it in a pot of cold water and you bring it up to temperature slowly. Otherwise, the frog will just jump out if you drop it into boiling water. And that's kind of the way that it seems to happen with alcohol and food. And I think we'll get into kind of some of the reasons why that is. one of the things I love about your podcast is that you talk about the psychology of it, and then so much of the science also, which you don't always find out there when it comes to when talking about alcohol. When I first started listening to your podcast, I was really fascinated by all of the things that go on in the brain when we drink alcohol and when we use alcohol to cope with stress and anxiety. Can you talk a little bit about what happens actually in our brain when we choose to unwind with alcohol? What are we actually doing mentally to ourselves?
Yeah, so with alcohol...
And biologically.
It affects your mental state, and it affects your brain chemistry. So when you drink alcohol, you feel relaxed, and that's because of the way that it's impacting your brain chemistry. It's actually slowing down your brain, and that relaxation you're feeling is just you caring less, or not having the capacity to care as much as normal. So that's why people will often use it for anxiety or chronic stress, or if you feel depressed, well, alcohol also causes a boost in serotonin. So now you feel much happier. So it's easy to go there to fix your mental state. But the problem is that's not natural. And your brain picks up on this like weird, unnatural thing going on, and it starts to make adjustments to balance it out. So if you're calming down your brain every day with alcohol, you're off balance, and your brain wants to stay like neutral and at its normal set point. So it's actually going to speed up its brain activity to try to counteract the slowing down effect from drinking alcohol. And then that doesn't wear off as soon as the alcohol does. So when that relaxing effect from your drinking wears off, now you're just left with this overexcitability. And that's why people will often get anxiety or feel like very like high energy and uncomfortable after they're done drinking, like 3 o'clock in the morning or the next day. And because of the pleasure that we feel from drinking alcohol, the brain will make adjustments there too. So it'll actually downregulate our dopamine receptors. So it'll reduce the amount of dopamine receptors that we have in the brain so that it's harder for dopamine to bind and get the same effect. So that's tolerance. So then where you may have been having 1 glass of wine at night to chill out and feel good and whatever, eventually that becomes 2, and then eventually that becomes 4, and so on. And the same thing happens with food, is when we're using food for pleasure or food to cope, our brain makes adjustments so that it's harder for us to get to that space unnaturally. Mm-hmm. And then we need even more food to get to that place. And then both of these situations just cause a lot of shame and self-hatred and a spiral, and then you're triggered to drink or eat from the shame, and then your brain continues to adapt, and you need even more of the substance to get the same effect. So it's awful. It's a really horrible cycle, and at the end, you're really just drinking or eating or using to go back to like baseline levels, like to go from bad to okay. You're not even getting that like great feeling that you were in the beginning anymore.
And then there's that whole side where, we're conditioning ourselves to think that dopamine hit we're getting from the alcohol is actually fixing the issue. It's kind of like you go on an unsustainable diet and you lose 10 pounds in the first 2 weeks, and you think the diet worked, but then you can't do it anymore. You gain the weight back. You blame yourself. You feel ashamed for losing your result, but you really set yourself up for failure in the beginning by, doing something that on the diet side wasn't sustainable, but on the alcohol side and with food, like you get that dopamine response. You feel like it worked, and you don't really think about the fact that it doesn't keep working is actually because of what it's doing to you, not because you're a failure of a person.
Yeah, and that's where we go. I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I can't do anything right. But really, we're using substances to try to fix our mental state or how we feel about ourselves or how we feel about our life. But we're not actually fixing the real problem, so it persists. And problems don't usually just, stay wherever they're at over time. They continue to get worse the more we ignore them. And you're teaching yourself, like, when I come home and I'm stressed out, alcohol fixes that problem, or food fixes that problem. Like for me, in sobriety, I can't have my alcohol anymore. So my mind is like, okay, well, food fixes, like, we know food is good. Like, why don't we get takeout? That's exciting and fun. Or let's eat a bunch of sugar. Like, that's a good time. So your mind is sending you these signals because you learned the behavior. You learn that it helps in the moment, and you have these beliefs that are like, they're kind of true, but they're not true long term, like you were saying. So then you're always needing to go back to it.
What we're really talking about here is coping mechanisms, right? And, both alcohol and food are notorious coping mechanisms. So once somebody realizes, has the awareness that maybe they're using alcohol and food as an unhealthy coping mechanism, what's a better way to find healthy coping mechanisms from all the people you've, helped lead into sobriety? What have you seen work?
Coping mechanisms are hard because a lot of them feel stupid. And whenever I have something going on in my life, my first instinct is still like, have 1,000 drinks and ruin your life. And my second instinct is eat a bunch of food, or like get a bunch of sugar, or don't eat at all. Depends on the situation. And then after I get through those self-destructive thoughts, I start listing off a bunch of coping strategies, and most of them sound stupid, and that's why we don't want to do them, and we keep going to alcohol or food. And the problem is, things that actually help don't help immediately, where alcohol and food fix your problem immediately and then hurt you long term. So we're looking for a coping strategy that's going to have the same effect, and anything that's good for you isn't going to give you instant gratification, unfortunately. So we have to do these things that feel stupid because we know they're going to help future us. So I think the one that has helped me the most is going on walks and listening to really loud music. And when you're like blasting music in your ears, you can't really think about how much you suck, or your life sucks, or like everybody else sucks, or all these problems will never be fixed. You're distracted. And with feelings like anger or anxiety, they're very high energy feelings. And we try to stuff those down and make them go away because we shouldn't be feeling angry. We shouldn't be feeling anxious. And when you stuff it down, it doesn't make it go away. It makes it wait around and get worse. So what I do for feelings like that is actually do something with my body, like go to the gym, lift the heaviest thing that you can find, go on a walk and listen to really loud music, or go on a run if you like to run. Go to some kind of class, like do something physical, like clean your house. If I'm like mad at my husband, I'll rage clean the kitchen, and he knows like it's in big trouble. And then
steer clear.
Right? Yeah, you did something, figure out what it was. But for like sad feelings or low energy, being kind to yourself helps. So sometimes I just lie on the couch and watch a funny movie, or watch YouTube videos, or play video games, or go get my nails done. So it depends on the energy behind the emotion for what you have to do, but stuffing it down or feeling like it's the wrong feeling to have is not the right approach, because it's not going to go away, whatever you do. If you're trying to make it go away, it's only going to go away if you embrace it, to just feel it.
That's such a great point you made, though, about we maybe try one of these healthier coping mechanisms like on a Monday, and then Tuesday we're like, well, I still want to drink. It didn't work. It's like it's so much of this comes down to expectations and setting out, knowing like, okay, it took a long time to develop this habit. It might take a little bit of time to replace it with a healthier habit. I've definitely used the technique of people who, will snack out of boredom or things like that. And they really they're looking for just some kind of release from either their boredom or their anxiety or whatever, like getting down and doing 20, 25 push-ups and then sitting with the way that you feel for a few minutes before you go for the snack. And you'd be surprised how many times that actually leads them just to go back to whatever they were doing, and those feelings kind of dissipate if I can get them to stick with it for, 2 weeks doing that.
Yeah, and list out all the stupid things in your head and find the least stupid one and just do that.
Right. Or if you work from home and there's nobody around, just go straight to the stupid one. Who cares? A lot of people, they're not even really aware of the role alcohol has in their weight gain or in their inability to lose fat, no matter what diet they've tried. You have episode number 34 of your podcast, which goes really in depth in this, but I want to touch on some of the things you talk about in this episode. Can you talk about the main ways that drinking really makes fat loss so difficult? I'm talking about, both on the energy balance side of things and then also things like acetate and NAD.
Yeah, so the simple one is on the energy balance side. So if you're drinking, you're getting calories from that. A lot of people get the drunchies and they want to eat more. If you're hungover the next day, you might want to cure your hangover with very unhealthy food. So drinking can often lead to a lot of eating or just the drinking calories itself. And on the metabolism side, there have been some studies that have found that alcohol slows down your metabolism and your fat burning ability. So the things that are needed to process alcohol are also used to break down body fat and get rid of it. So because alcohol is something that's not supposed to be in our body, it takes priority over anything else. So your body is doing a bunch of processes all day long, like it's keeping you alive, it's digesting your food, it's repairing any DNA damage that occurs so that you don't get cancer. It's like looking out for invaders, like so you don't get sick, stuff like that. And burning fat is like, that's not really a priority. That's not going to keep you alive if your body burns fat or not. So that one is easy to just not do or do a lot less. But when you're drinking alcohol, that becomes the number one priority because it can cause cancer. It can affect your health in a lot of different negative ways. And your body has to get rid of that first. So both because that is the priority and because they kind of use the same coenzymes, so like NAD. So they both use NAD to both burn fat and eliminate alcohol. Your fat metabolism goes down very low or to nothing. Like there's one study that I like. It's kind of old, but they gave the guys 2 vodka drinks with like sugar-free lemonade as a mixer. And it accounted to 200 calories. That's it. And that's not enough to ruin your diet or make you gain a bunch of weight. But they found that their ability to burn fat and get rid of it was reduced by like 73%. So you could be on your diet, like doing everything right, like you're killing it, you're going to the gym, you're eating all the healthy food, and you're drinking alcohol a few times a week. And it could take your diet like 2, 3, 4 times as long to lose the same amount of weight. So if I'm trying to lose 10 pounds, but I'm only burning 25% of the fat that I normally would, that's a really long diet just to lose 10 stupid pounds. And that's where a lot of people give up or they self-sabotage, or there's other people that will like do everything great during the week. And then over the weekend, like they'll binge drink, just like maybe one night even. Eat gross food the next day to cure it, but all the other days are great. And they stay like trapped in this cycle because that one day is blowing up all your other days. And it's not just the calories, which is what most of us think. It's the effect on your metabolism from all the alcohol. And alcohol isn't instantly processed and eliminated. It takes time. And while it's in your body, it is affecting your metabolism. So yeah, that is something that I didn't know until I stopped drinking. And I was like, well, that is why all of my efforts never seem to work. Now it makes sense.
It's so true. You talk about you talk in that episode about why alcohol makes fat loss difficult, about how one of the byproducts of your body metabolizing alcohol is acetate, and your body will use acetate as an energy source, even in the presence of your body fat, even if you're in a calorie deficit. So you could be on point with your diet, but just have a prevalence of acetate around to burn energy all the time, and that could potentially be enough to wipe out some of your calorie deficit. And like you said, drag on your fat loss phase forever. It's like, you go into the gym every single day, but you're only doing one exercise. It's not a very efficient use of your efforts.
Yeah, and acetate, it provides us with energy, like you said. And the studies have found that heavy drinkers will have very high levels of acetate in their brains, like over 24 hours after their last drink. So it doesn't just go away because you had your drinks 2 days ago or something like that. And that's another reason why it's hard to stop drinking, because people feel really fatigued because all of the acetate circulating through our body and our brain is an energy source, and your brain learns to rely on that for energy and less so on glucose. So when you stop drinking, now your body has to relearn how to utilize glucose for energy. So you might be really tired in the beginning, and that's really, really normal. If anyone is experiencing it, it's really normal.
It's like you're having a case of the keto flu, but from alcohol, where you just, same kind of science there. I want to make sure that we leave people with hope at the end of this podcast, that like, if they want to stop drinking, that they can. I mean, you've seen how many people do it in the time that you've been sober and had your podcast. What are some of the most popular or best resources that people can use to help hold themselves accountable, and just to kind of give their sobriety journey some structure, set them up for the best success they can?
Yeah, structure is so important, and support is critical. We think all the time, I am not like other people. I can do this on my own. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't need meetings and all this stuff. But studies have found that, studies on people who did dry January, that people that had support were way more successful than people that did not. And it was like getting support just about doubled your chances of succeeding in dry January. So it makes a big impact. And what I tell people that are resistant to getting support is like, a year from now, when you're not drinking and like living your best life and super happy, you're not going to look back and be like, oh my gosh, I really wish that I didn't go to meetings like that. I really wish I didn't go to therapy. Like, no one thinks that way. So
doesn't happen.
Yeah. And for me, the best accountability I've had is a therapist, because I have to see this person every week. And I know, like, I'm going to tell them about how my life has been. So it helps give you that pause. I think the most important thing is, like, you have a feeling, and then often we just do something about it. We eat, we drink, we yell at people, whatever. But having a moment in between is what keeps you from doing those self-destructive things. So what can give you that pause is working with a therapist, going to meetings, and it doesn't have to be AA. There's, I can give you a bunch of links, but there's the Luckiest Club. Great. Yeah, the Luckiest Club, Tempest, Sober Mom Squad, East Coast Sober Squad, and none of those are affiliated with any kind of religion or step work or anything. There's Smart Recovery, that's more like kind of science-based. So there's a lot of options beyond AA if people aren't comfortable with that. There's a ton of Facebook groups that people have a lot of success in. And you join the Facebook group, and all the people in there are just like you, trying to stop drinking or trying to drink less. So anything that gets you community and like that pause in between your feeling and your action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, if you could send over some links, I'll definitely put them in the show notes to this episode. Speaking of episodes, your most recent podcast episode, I didn't tell you I was going to bring this up, but you talked a lot about the increase in drinking lately, and just kind of this, how serious it is. What were some of the things that kind of surprised you when you started doing research for that episode, and just kind of tell our listeners what you found and what's going on out there?
Yeah, so there was a study that looked at the year 2020 and alcohol-related deaths. So every year, on average, there's about a 3.6% increase in alcohol-related deaths compared to the year before. And there was one year, I think it was like 2018 to 19, there's a 5% increase. But every year on average, it's about 3%. But in the year 2020, there was a 25% increase in alcohol-related deaths, and more people died from alcohol-related reasons than from COVID. And there were only 9 months of the pandemic in 2020. So we don't have data for 2021, but that was the first full year. And a lot of people are drinking more. A lot of people backed off, like the true social drinkers, because they weren't socializing. They didn't really have a reason to drink. And I think like they are amazing. Like, good for you guys. But a lot of people were really stressed out. They were really uncertain about what was going on. They had a lot more time. They were bored. They had mental health struggles, and they drank to deal with that. Parents increased their drinking by a lot. I forget the statistic, but parents were much more likely to increase their drinking than people who were not parents. And it's really sad how many people lost their lives from drinking because of pandemic-related stress.
Yeah, developing that habit, and then, you know, even as the world gets back to normal, the habit is still in place, and it's just as hard to break of a habit as, you know, a food-related habit that gets you into trouble. So yeah, everybody listening to this needs to go check out that episode.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'll definitely link to everything we talked about in the show notes. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you and follow everything you're doing online?
I hang out on Instagram a lot. If you want to DM me over there, Sober Powered. That's also my Facebook group. If you need a safe space to hang out, you don't have to be sober to be in the group. That's my podcast, my website. So you'll find me if you search for Sober Powered.
And also, you seem to have you're becoming somewhat of a foodie on your Instagram lately, posting, you know, new recipes that you're trying and showing your plates of food. What's going on there? Are you thinking about a career change?
Thank you. I actually posted my smoothie earlier today. I don't know if you saw it yet, but I made a smoothie. So when I was drinking, I used to drink and cook. And that was a big part of the experience. And when I stopped drinking, I stopped cooking, like, completely. And I am spoiled to have, you know, a good job, and my husband's a scientist too, and we don't have any kids. So I didn't really feel the need to cook. I just got takeout all the time. And takeout started doing something for me in my head that alcohol used to do. And it felt dangerous and like cool. And it was like chaotic because you never knew if it was going to be late, or like maybe they would forget something, or maybe the food would suck. So it was like my way of keeping the chaos alive. It was awful. And I have cooked maybe like 5 times in the past year, except for the past few days. And I've tried and tried and tried to get myself to cook again. And it's something that I'm learning to do, but I keep asking myself, I don't remember if I told you this. I feel like I did. But I was watching the Tomb Raider movie on a plane recently, and the actress, the newer one, not the one with Angelina Jolie, but she just like looks amazing. Like, she's the best. And I thought like she is my goal. I would love to look like 50% of what she looks like. So I've been asking myself, like, what would Tomb Raider do when I want to get takeout? Like, today I wanted to get takeout for lunch. And I was like, would Tomb Raider get takeout? Would Tomb Raider get a milkshake? Like, would Tomb Raider sit on the couch? So I made the smoothie, and it wasn't as good as takeout, but, you know, I can at least be proud. But yeah, so it gives me that pause that I was talking about between having a feeling and then getting the takeout. So it's helping. I don't know. It's hard. No promises. I might go back to not cooking anything, but That's my struggle right
all
now.
of us are good. All of us that follow you can hold you accountable to keep it up with the pictures in your story then. Because you told me that you actually have a history of what did you do bodybuilding? And because I know you tracked macros and you understand, you understand nutrition coaching and everything. What is your background in that?
Yeah, so I started.
I should have started with this.
You can move it later if you want.
It's all good.
So, I struggled with disordered eating in college, where like my dream was to be as thin as possible. That was like my life's goal. And after I started recovering from that, that's when I started drinking. So I swapped one thing for the other. And then after like years of therapy and feeling healthier, I started getting into lifting. And I thought, macros, like do the whole thing, lift, get super strong, deadlifts, like all of it. And it was something that I did throughout my drinking. Actually, I would get up and go to the gym at 5:30 in the morning, 6 days a week, almost no matter what. It was very rare that I would miss the gym, even though I was a daily drinker who was just like destroying myself every night. And I got really strong. I could do I think I got up to like 135 for a deadlift, which is like a little more than I weigh. And I felt like, deadlifts start at 135. Like I felt so cool, like I had made it.
Yeah.
And
the big plates.
Right? Yeah, the big plates. And then I stalled out and I could get no progress on like any of my lifts, no matter what. And I found miraculously when I stopped drinking, all the progress started again, and like my strength shot up, and it was really cool. But that's another struggle actually in sobriety, because that was like my big drinking passion, was thinking about macros and thinking about lifting and like doing research on that then it kind of became like this warped hobby in sobriety, and something that I'm trying to find balance with now. So I lost all my gains because of quarantine, but
Yeah, people lifting gallon bottles of water and soup cans and stuff.
Yeah, and I'm over here
you're
like,
right.
That's stupid. Like, I'm not going to lift at home. Like, that's dumb. And then look at me. I lost all my gains, and they did the stupid thing for their long-term benefit.
I tell you what, we transitioned to an online business basically right at the beginning of 2020. Before that, my wife Blakely owned an in-person gym, so the timing worked out. But we actually saw a big boom to the business during that time, because so many people that were working out in gyms wanted to keep working out. But you brought up something else that makes a lot of sense, because you said your progress stalled out when you were drinking and still trying to lift. One of those things that alcohol does is inhibit muscle protein synthesis. Also, you're not building and repairing muscle. You're going to plateau pretty quickly. I mean, when Blakely owned the gym, it was not uncommon for people to show up for the 6 a.m. class that had only been on a few hours sleep and had been drinking the last night. And it's just like, I think people are still under the misconception that they can just outwork all these unhealthy habits, whether it's their nutrition or the drinking. But the magic really happens when you combine the two, honestly, if you have goals for both.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of influencers will say, like, you can drink alcohol on a diet, or you can drink alcohol and still gain strength or whatever. But, I mean, you can, a small amount. But, more and more studies are finding that any amount of alcohol isn't productive. So it's something that we all have to decide for ourselves, like weigh the pros and cons. Like for me, it was always a great idea, and that's why I can't do it. But most people can weigh the pros and cons and say like, well, I do really want to get stronger. I have this goal for my lift. I want to get it to a certain number. And if I go out and drink tonight, I know I'm setting myself back in terms of strength progression. So it's just thinking about it that way. And if you can have balance, then, good. I'm happy for you.
Yeah. I have to be, as a nutrition coach, I have to be careful, because alcohol is a sensitive topic with adults, and they don't really want another adult telling them like, you can't drink. But it's my job as their coach to tell them like, okay, this might be something that's holding you back, and to not be hypocritical. I tell them that I also will drink alcohol. But I tell them, if there's somebody who drinks routinely and they aren't quite sure that it's really holding them back, I'll encourage them to try an extended period sober so they can actually be reminded of what it feels like to not wake up with that feeling. And often that is enough to give them some reward to be like, okay, I remember what this feels like now. This is better.
Yeah, we get used to feeling mildly hungover all the time, or tired, or not having a full night's sleep. And that becomes our baseline. And like, we don't even realize that that's not how we should be feeling. So I think taking a month off that's enough. Just 1 month, and you'll see how good you feel. And you'll see, your sleep will probably improve. Your experience in the gym will probably improve. Whatever you're doing, running, lifting, swimming, I don't know. Everything will improve, and then you'll have that information, and you can't forget that information once you know it. Like, once you know, you sleep better, you feel better, you're more productive in the gym, you make better food choices without alcohol. You'll never forget that, and then that will inform your decisions no matter what you do for the future. So maybe it just makes your barrier to drinking a little bit higher, and that's a good thing.
Heck yeah, that's great advice. All right, well, I already wrapped up, so I guess I just have to wrap up again. But I really appreciate this. I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of this. And as more things come up in your podcast, I might invite you to come back on again if it's something that I think our listeners would like to listen to. So everybody go listen to Gill's podcast, Sober Powered Podcast. Check her out on all the socials. And thanks for listening, guys.